Welcome to Looking for Some episode 13, and this one is titled Destroy Democracy and Diligence. That'll become apparent as to why very, very soon, and there's going to be a bit of a thread as I'll go through this. Hopefully you've managed to get over the large data dump that took place last week, which it will have relevance to things as I'm moving forward, because some of the as I'm sure you can imagine, some of the departments that we'll be looking at in total, there's quite a bit of crossover, and then the next one that I'm going to be going into, which I'll explain when I come to it, there's a fair overlap in this instance. But anyway, one other piece of information I wanted to give before I get going, and this is especially for those people that require subtitles. I know for some reason these days it's called captions, but it's subtitles. There was somebody that I forget her name. I had been connected to briefly on LinkedIn, and she did get in touch in a previous episode, and that's to say about subtitles. And it's generated automatically now, so I'll leave it in their hands. It's not something that I specifically organise. But the one thing I have noticed when I've done a little check to see what the subtitles are like is that they do like to miss out some of the colourful language, which I do find quite amusing, and in many ways, and that I hope that an awful lot of the people that's reliant on subtitles are very good at lip reading as well. But there's one word that I don't know if I'll be able to keep it going in my head, and that to remind myself to use it so that you don't end up with that problem, because it's obviously something that's been done by Americans. They don't understand what the word wanker means, and so wanker does appear in the subtitles. So that's a useful tip to anybody else that wants to use a particular form of language, a form of expression, and be able to get past the automated subtitles. It will appear. So that's a little tip for anyone. Right. So that was my little bit of mischief for the time being. There are going to be a couple of differences to this week's episode, and that, but I'll explain things as I go along. So, why have I called it Destroy Democracy and Diligence? I suppose if I'd have spent more time thinking about it now, I could have come up with a better title, but there's only so much time. So, some people, I have noticed some articles around this as well, some of which I will be referring to. Some people have noticed how the Boris and Biden message is identical. That's essentially a bit of parroting of rhetoric by people that are quite clearly literally using what was Agenda 21 back in 1992, then up to Agenda 2030, that I can't remember when that started exactly, but has then subsequently become this Great Reset, which there's more information coming out about this, and that more people are becoming aware of what the Great Reset is, and that is largely pushed by the World Economic Forum. But this Build Back Better comes directly from this. So you've essentially got Boris in the fortunate thing in America is, for God's sake, for the entire world's sake, do not vote for the senile old bastard. Senile old wanker, I should remember. Don't vote for him, for God's sake, because you knew you weren't getting him anyway. And if anybody thinks that you're getting Kamala, you're not getting her either. You're basically getting the World Economic Forum, you're getting the United Nations, you're getting everything that you really don't want. So, in the UK, we've already made the mistake of having our useless muppet standing there and just vomiting out the words that are handed to him. So we'll have to figure out how we're going to deal with that all in good time. So there is something about this, though, and there's a couple of parts to this, because although the core part of the Great Reset is coming from the World Economic Forum, as I've explained before, and that's when I've done the FOWEFUN part, it's all down to tentacles and things of this nature, and quite often in circumstances where they try to make themselves look a little bit bigger than they actually are. And there's a lot of it around this particular scenario that has those precise elements to it. And there was a post that I put up earlier today on Parler and on Minds, and it's just something that I've kind of pinched from somebody a little bit, just a teeny bit, and I'll explain that and give a shout out to that particular individual when I move on after this bit. But it made me think about how it is that when you mention things like the Great Reset and Agenda 2030 and blah blah blah, the first words that come out of anybody's mouth is conspiracy theorist, because that's the quickest way to try to shut somebody down by claiming something is a conspiracy theory. Well, in terms of that, I've got some notes again. Let's think about what I know that the latest postmodernist morons and that like to think that words have no meaning either, but they do. And so let's break down the term conspiracy theory in terms of this particular scenario. Get me words out. Now, anybody you can see from the picture that I've got on this page here, this is direct from the World Economic Forum website, The Great Reset. And there is a widget, which I always include in the links in the description, that takes you through to what is named at that particular point as the World Economic Forum's COVID response, which has got absolutely fuck all to do with COVID. But when you have this level of evidence in front of you, directly in front of your face, they're actually promoting it themselves. You know, there's the video out there with Prince Charles introducing the Great Reset. There's old Adolf Schwab giving his introduction to it. So essentially, to say that anything around this is a theory would be ludicrous, because there's direct evidence there. It's empirical evidence. You can't refute it. It's not a theory. Okay, so we can take the theory part out of the equation, which leaves us with the term conspiracy. Now, if we look up the definition of the term conspiracy, for me myself, and that I've just used DuckDuckGo, put conspiracy definition in there, and immediately you'll get what that means at the top of the page. And the first thing it says is an agreement to perform together an illegal, wrongful or subversive act. So when somebody is looking into something which is evidenced and therefore not a theory, you then want to wonder as to who is actually performing the illegal, wrongful or subversive act. So it shouldn't take a great deal of thought to understand that the United Nations and especially the World Economic Forum, they are not the governing bodies of any nation. Each nation is a sovereign state. I mean, even if you was to take it in terms of like the European Union, that is a particular bloc, and they are not governed by the United Nations or the World Economic Forum. So when you have two large organisations and various little tentacles from there, which are working together to cause subversive actions, i.e. changing the whole structure of a sovereign state to fit their narrative, then surely they are the conspirators. By definition, it has to be them that are the subversives and the conspirators. Now, take that one step further than that, and including this Build Back Better. As much as the terminology comes directly out of this Great Reset. What they've done is they set up the little tentacles, and there is actually a Build Back Better organisation which has a whole range of the usual suspects included within it. Again, the image, make it look like you're bigger and more important than you are. If anybody, if you bother your ass to check through and at each one of the organisations, you'll see the same names cropping up all over the place. So it's essentially, comparatively speaking, you're talking about a tiny group of individuals making themselves look bigger, working in a subversive way against the governance of the sovereign people. So one of the interesting parts of that, in specific relationship to our blonde-haired muppet, he's then taking instructions and using the terminology and rhetoric of a group that includes within it several factions of what I call excrement rebellion. I'm sure you know who I mean. So there's several factions of that, and they're listed within this Build Back Better. Again, all the links are in the description. That particular organisation has been listed in the UK as an extremist organisation. And when I say extremist organisation, they are listed alongside Islamist fundamentalist groups, so terrorist groups, and neo-Nazi groups. And so we have the Prime Minister of the UK using the rhetoric of a group that his own government has listed as extremists. So, I mean, it's bad enough when you look at some of the other members that are in there, and that, I mean, perennial liars, retards, socialists and communists. For example, like Greenpeace. I mean, I'm sure there's a fair few of you in that probably don't understand an awful lot about Greenpeace, but you might want to check out Dr. Michael Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, and get some idea as to how everything they do has got absolutely nothing to do with environment at all. There is even a particular study that was of great interest to me at the time, because when you had all of this nonsense going on around plastic in the oceans, or we've all got to stop using plastic and that because all the oceans are full of plastic and blah 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 blah, and you had the David Eugenics Freak Attenborough, Blue Planet I think it was called, going on how the world is being killed by plastic. Absolute arse dribble, the lot of it. I mean, seriously large amounts of arse dribble. And there was a report that was put out by Michael Moore and I can't remember what his name is now, Willie Soon I think his name is, and they put out the actual report as to the state of the oceans and the levels of plastics in the ocean, and they showed directly what complete and utter nonsense and the amount of lies that were told all around that agenda that is still going on to this day. And if you remember back to last week's episode, I turned around and gave that example around the Foreign Commonwealth Office and for the buildings, and somehow how them changing to not using single-use plastic spoons is somehow got something to do with buildings. So it's just levels of bullshit. So you've got people here and that are pushing an agenda that has been developed by perennial liars. So when you've got the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, that have no place at all influencing or attempting to instill levels of governance, and particularly at the moment, and that especially with all this COVID bullshit, there's a great deal of instigation coming there in terms of these authoritarian measures. So this means that our elected government is actually behaving as a co-conspirator and yet the people that are supposed to be in charge of a sovereign state are the people. As much as we have a government, they are only there with the permission of the people. It's not a dictatorship. So this is why I've come up with the title of Destroying Democracy. I mean, it's democracy per se, and that, I mean, for what most people think democracy is. Do we actually live in a properly democratic state? Nation? Of course we don't. I'll move into the diligence part of it a little bit later on. But the key point is when they turn around and say things like, if we look at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, Excrement Rebellion, all these different little groups and that are coming out with all of these agendas and all this postmodernist crap, and quite frankly, when it comes down to the World Economic Forum in particular and Adolf Schwab, it is direct links back to the Red House report. Look it up for yourself. This is pretty much the definition of illegal, wrongful and subversive actions against the people without their permission, without most people's knowledge. People might want to start paying attention to what these people are doing, because the key part to it is understanding the fact that it's the words that are coming out of their mouths have been put there by somebody else, and it is going to be incumbent on the peoples of all nations to actually seek redress for all of this, because when you look towards a conspiracy on this level, this is essentially treasonous. And I don't say that as like some sort of throwaway word, because we know that lots of words these days are bandied around with, you know, complete intellectual void of knowledge as to what the words actually mean that they're being spewed around. But when it comes down to something on this particular level, the likes of which, I suppose, in some ways you could turn around and say it has happened in the past. So let's suffice to say, the extent and level that it's taking place at the moment has not been seen within recent history. And it genuinely is something that, like I say, I'm not using these words lightly. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to go around going traitor, traitor and all this sort of nonsense. This is something that has to be done on a legal basis, because legally defined, that is exactly what is going on. And these people have no permission to be doing these things. Even if you turn around and say, well, because you voted in the Conservatives, therefore, no. No, because at no point has any one of these parties stood in front of the public and said, by the way, we are going to simply be installing the instructions that are given to us by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. We're literally here as the mouthpiece. That's never been said. So it would, just through pure dishonesty, that would not stand up, and they would be co-conspirators. So keep that in mind. So there's an important part that I've seen lately, and that, I mean, I've even seen from like Priti Patel and what have you, and that standing in front of the exact same sign. But I mean, even if you took it down to its lowest level, and like I say, the fact that Excrement Rebellion are listed as a terrorist organisation in the UK, and yet they are working and using the exact terminology that has been handed to them by a terrorist group. Something's not right there. So let's move on, and I want to move into a couple of recommendations this week. Right, the first one at the top is the critical race theory is driving Britain mad, and that's done by Sargon of Akkad, who is otherwise known as Carl Benjamin. He does some good stuff. I mean, he's one of the I think he's one of the more original, quite well-known YouTubers, if that's a term that he likes, I don't know. But I mean, he's been around a long time. He's also one of the ones that's had the most problems on YouTube, being demonetized and targeted and called all the names under the sun. Yeah, he doesn't do anything wrong. He comes out with some good commentary. I mean, he's got some other stuff going on as well, and that. But this particular video of his and that I thought was worth looking at because it came to mind for me because of the problem. I may have mentioned this previously. I can't remember. Where I'd walked away from football when they came back from lockdown because all of the teams, and including the team that I was supporting, Aston Villa, they were the first Premier League team to play when they came back, and they all took the knee in support of this communist Black Lives Matter. And the moment they did that, I said, no, I'm not having it. I will not fall in line with this. Well, obviously, anybody that knows anything about football and that over the last weekend, there was quite a significant result for Aston Villa. And I was tempted to watch the highlights because I mean I've been supporting the team since I was a young kid, and I turned on. I think it might have been Match of the Day. I'm not entirely sure. I tend to avoid the BBC these days entirely, but it might have been Match of the Day. And literally the moment the game started, I watched them get on their knees again. And I said, fuck it, no, I can't watch. I don't want to know. I do not want to know. I mean, for them to still be doing that, despite all of the information that has come out, they're still doing it. I mean, how thick do you have to be? I mean, we understand that the footballers and that aren't exactly the brains of Britain, but the owners of the clubs, especially, why they're not going out and saying, don't you dare do that. Because under a socialist, and which then leads into communist totalitarian regime, you don't get to keep your fucking club, do you? So I mean, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Now they can come out with all of this bullshit and saying, oh well, no, it's a different movement from that one. No, it's not. It's all the same shit. And this particular program from Sargon of Akkad is a good indication of it, because he's showing how these idiot critical race theory bullshit is being spread around the corporate and the public sector as well. He particularly talks about Sainsbury's and then the council in Wales. I mean, who goes to Sainsbury's anyway these days? I don't know. But how they are literally enacting racism in the name of preventing racism. I mean, these people they are as thick as shit. They seriously are dumb as a bag of nails. It's ludicrous. The only thing I can possibly think of with these things, you play them at their own game. I mean, this is one of the biggest problems that most people, you know, it's kind of like this turn the other cheek type of nonsense. You can't do that. If somebody walks up and slaps you, you slap them back. When somebody is turning around and literally promoting the worst levels of racism and the fact that they don't understand it, they've got no idea what they're actually going to be responsible for in pushing this sort of shit. I'm sure Adolf Schwab will be very happy to see it, because that falls in line with his particular doctrine. But for these organisations to be pushing this nonsense is just beyond stupid. And people need to turn around, play their game and say, we're not having anything to do with it. We're not going to work with you. We're not going to shop. We're not going to go near you. Hope you fucking go out of business. Drop dead, the lot of you. You fucking idiots. You deserve it. Just have nothing more to do with them. If they want to play that game, have nothing to do with them. Something else will take your place. Or the others will certainly bloody learn quickly. So that's worth a look in. Now, the second one, it's Libertarian Views by Scotty M. Now, I came across this one because of a recommendation in one of Sargon of Akkad's posts on Parler. And since he's been around putting videos out for quite a while, and he's very, very, very good. Obviously knows his stuff in terms of what's what the real definitions are of socialism, capitalism, communism, etc. Covers a range of different subjects. For anybody that is interested out there and that has anything to do with photography or anything like that, by the way, and that you might be want to have a look at some of his work. That's what his main role in life is. So I'll give him a little bit of a plug for that. And he's very good at taking on the content of particularly the socialist ideologies and then explaining very well. I mean, the knowledge that he's got from obviously from the various studies that he's done around this. I mean, whether that's, I think it is largely through reading the books and that. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as you're educated. He's knowledgeable on this stuff, and he can give a very good explanation and breakdown as to what all of these different things mean, and where the socialists and communists always get everything wrong. Literally get everything wrong. So he's certainly worth having a look at. I do recommend the channel, especially for those companies, you know, the ones in business as well. If you're operating a company and you have these morons, like I say from the previous one, that Sainsbury's and what have you, and turn around having people coming up and telling you you've got to do critical race theory, and or you've now got to start pushing yourself towards these socialist ideas, get a clue and have a bit of a watch of Scotty, because if you do follow down that road, you dumb as shit, you really will be. So I certainly recommend Scotty, and it was down to me watching a bit of Scotty's content this past week that it triggered that thought of, well, the definition of conspiracy. And I thought that was the way that he does things now. I thought that was a very good and sensible way of being able to essentially empirical evidence. This is what it actually means. So I'll recommend it. So have a look at that. Again, links in the description. Oh, and if you do want to comment on any of Scotty's videos, he's good at answering as well. So it's not just sort of make the videos, chuck it out there, see what happens. He does actually take the time to respond to people as well. And smart lad. So yes, please do watch it. Right, before I move into the Sisyphus Complex Solution, what I wanted to do was give a little bit of a note that because of the huge data dump that I did last week, I kind of thought, well, shall I start to make things a little bit easier for you and start to pick off some of the smaller departments? And I thought, okay, well, if I do that, which one am I going to go for? And I thought, well, okay, well, DFID, because of, if you remember last week and that, I'd mentioned about the airport in St Helena, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I thought, well, so there's at least some sort of relative shift over. I thought I'll have a look at that one. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. I had heard something along those lines, but obviously when I went to do the check and that, yes, it is true. It has now been amalgamated with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to become the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So the two offices that were related to that have literally just shifted straight over, and that, so it's not a massive change as such. But when I looked at that, I thought, well, oh, bollocks to it, and that I'll just go in the order that I've got it written down right from the get-go, and I'll just do my normal, the 1, 2, 3, and keep everything in order. And so I've decided instead to go with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and this is going to be a bugger. So let's move into that part of things. It's going to be a bugger because, again, it does have the direct correlation, and as I mentioned at the beginning, and that the crossover to, in particular, the Infrastructure Projects Authority. If you manage to get through that one, you'll understand what I mean. And this is also going to be an important one because, again, when it comes down to understanding whether the nation is, as I've explained previously, that if it's a Rhine capitalist system, if it's a capitalist system, whether it's a socialist system, etc., etc. This type of thing is going to give you a very good indication, because, and I have had some involvement with this type of structure and with some of the organisations included within this, with all of the offices underneath BEIS. And I think you'll find that the UK is considerably more socialist than you'd imagine, and it's a very good indication as to how these policies of the World Economic Forum are very much at play within the nation. So the key thing to keep an eye on here is the fact that there's excuse me, there is the budget of 14.1 billion. I'll just put my watch on, I've forgotten. Even though I seldom look at it, it's just one of those things, it's a habit. 14.1 billion. Now, I've got to be careful about the 14.1 billion because of the crossover of some of the projects that were listed in last week's episode. I'll move into that a little bit later on, but it also indicates that this is the department as a whole. So I'm essentially going to take this number as a guideline, and then when I'm running through the different departments and that, sort of add up and see if the figures meet, so that then the right number gets put into the process plan as things are moving forward. So I'll come to demonstrate what I mean as I'm moving forward. You'll get the idea either way. Now, the thing about this initially, it's like I say, 14.1 billion is a rather large amount of money again. Another department that are not very good in terms of transparency, because the 14.1 billion number actually comes from the National Audit Office. The documentation that BEIS themselves are putting forward, it's not giving the kind of data that they should be obliged to be publishing. So the issue I've got around that is that the National Audit Office, and that is anybody that's ever dealt with auditors in the past, it's not necessarily a case of them doing a proper deep dive into the numbers and seeing if it all adds up correctly. It's just literally another little rubber stamp between mates in a large amount of the circumstances. So again, the links are in the description as to what this is all about. So there's going to be 41 agencies in total underneath this particular department, but they've also said on their webpage that they're involved with 8 high profile groups. There we go. The 8 high profile groups I did have listed on the original document, and so I'll simply be just shifting them up, and that's fine. So 49 agencies in total that becomes, How many episodes this is going to take to cover, no, I don't know. We'll have to see. But the thing about it is, and that is with quite a lot of them, the relevance to being able to weed out this issue of the creeping socialism is going to have to play a very important role in this, because as much as we've got here, so from this page, from the one report that they do produce, so you've got the scope of the system, the scope of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. So initially, straight away, that you've got the fighting coronavirus. What the hell has that got to do with that? It's when you're continuously shutting down businesses the way that they're doing, it's less. Because I mean, again, they've got it underneath that with the backing business. I mean, you can't be backing business at the same time as you're shutting them down. So again, this smacks to me of this lunatic agenda where we're going to shut down all of the competition, basically. We're going to make you more dependent on the ones that we want. And that will become more apparent in how that's been a game being played for a number of years now through various funding programs, which as much as it's presented as though that they want to help smaller businesses, once you actually work within that system, you can see quite clearly that it's got nothing to do with smaller businesses. And I'll move into more detail on that as we're going forward, but you need to understand who is actually running a lot of the big business in the UK right now, and it's far from a capitalist system. It's far from free trade. It's far from private organisations. It's a really, really piss poor system that needs to be really taken to pieces. I mean, if they'd have turned around and said in fighting coronavirus and that they were giving some sort of assistance to the other departments that were helping out with the pharmaceutical sector, I mean, as much as I've got severe doubts around vaccines and things of that nature, but you would imagine that it would have some relevance towards those types of businesses and the healthcare system, not the way that they're talking about it. So that's all bollocks. The backing business side of things and that, and supporting the SMEs, absolute bullshit. They're literally destroying SMEs. They're not creating them. And you should, like I say, I mean, I'll go into some of the details of it later on that, but probably in other episodes when I come to the appropriate office. It's putting severe restrictions on SMEs, the regulations and who they have to sell to and things of this nature. It's an appalling system. So it's just an outright lie. The unleashing innovation part of things, again, falls foul of this system that they do have in place, which basically means that if you're a smaller company and you are creating something innovative, something new, if you're an organisation or an individual that is able to produce something that is of benefit to society, you are funneled straight into a system whereby your level of ownership of that and your distribution of it's automatically taken away from you. So the R&D that they're talking about, and that perhaps a lot of people don't understand as well, and that's the taxpayer funding the R&D for large organisations that should be paying for their own R&D. So again, it's a system that most people don't really know an awful lot about, and I'll try to expose some of it because, like I say, the policy suggestions going forward is going to be doing something about this, because it's huge overreach. And then of course you've got the tackling climate change. I mean, give me a break. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying this, but that's not based on any facts whatsoever. There is no such thing as consensus in science. There is the scientific method, of which none of this falls in line with the scientific method. Have a look at all these idiotic bloody suggestions that the world is going to blow up by 2030, and then have a look at all of the times that we've been told over the last 60 years that, oh, if we don't do this and don't do that within the next 5 or 10 years, In some instances, and especially if you listen to Prince Charles, the moron that he is, he even puts it down to things like, oh, if we don't do this in 150 days, the world is going to end. And then those days come and then they go. And it's like the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, the end of the world and that, and they're going to be the only ones that are getting taken up to heaven and all this sort of shit. And their doomsday scenario, it comes, it goes, nothing happens, and they just pick another date. It's idiotic. There is no science behind this. It's the same sort of thing that we're getting with this Ponzi China virus. It's a complete ignorance of science. Everything that they're doing is politically motivated and has nothing to do with science, evidence, empirical evidence, epistemology. It is all just guff. That's why I highlight at the bottom that their accountability provided through clear evidence-based business planning. How can you have an evidence-based part of that sentence when you're pushing something that doesn't bloody exist? Now, when I say doesn't exist, of course the climate changes. I mean, you can go so far and that's say, well, climate change, all right, this is the climate changes between bloody winter, spring, summer and autumn. That's a climate change. But in terms of their man-made AGW, anthropogenic global warming, absolute bollocks. So, essentially, their entire accountability is based on a lie. So when your initial premise is based on a lie, then the rest of it loses its meaning. Okay? It's just these are simple facts. So, obviously as well, I mean the business planning side of that sentence as well. I'll be able to demonstrate on I don't know how many occasions as I run through this and that the business planning side of things is completely missing. It's kind of similar to when I spoke about the Infrastructure Projects Authority and their supposed expertise in project management. And if you remember the chart that was there, that was missing so many steps of competency. Same thing stands with this. I mean, I can give one example. Sitting in a meeting that took place in, I think it was in 2016. Involved with one of these types of projects that they do, and the supposed guy that was coming along to check to make sure that everything was being run correctly, he was basically half asleep throughout the entire thing, and quite rightly too, because the amount of absolute guff that was coming out of these people's mouths that I was sat around the table with was just phenomenal. Now my part within it was to say, well, how are you actually supposed to consolidate all of this into a practical business opportunity? How do you actually formalise this into a practical business perspective and taking things forward? And so I'd started to give a little bit of a speech, and that as to how you'd actually go about doing that, what the processes were, what the options were, and what the obligations of each particular participant would be. At that time I already knew that it wouldn't go forward anyway, and that because I was dealing with morons, but the fella actually woke up and did state at the end of this meeting that that's the first time he'd heard anybody actually talk about putting business together in a competent fashion. And it just goes to show how poorly put together so many of these things are. And at the right point in that, I'll also go into, because an awful lot of this and that, I mean, when I quite often say, well, how do things work in your countries? I already know that this type of system is very prevalent. It's very prevalent in Europe in particular, because you have things like, which the UK side and that has also been involved with, I think it'll come to an end soon, the Horizon 2020 projects. Have a look up the term Valley of Death and see what that means. I've had involvement with these types of programs out in the US. Now granted, the US tend to be a little bit better at this sort of stuff, but it's still a similar kind of line. There's giving assistance to the market, and then there's just blindly following stupidity. And the UK and Europe as well, they follow the stupid side. So anyway, in terms of their scope, it's all based on bullshit initially. So that's something that we've got to be concerned about straight away with this particular department. So the second part to this that I want to look at is in terms of the I've got to give a mention as well on that about the crossover of the projects. So if you remember all of the projects that are listed in the Infrastructure Projects Authority, it was broken down by department. There was a series of projects that were listed under BEIS. Now, when I've checked so far with this department, there's crossover of 5 projects, which means that I've got to deduct the values from this 14.1 billion. Okay, so what I'll be doing, and I'll add it up later on, and that's so you can see it properly in that, but I just want to give a mention that the Geological Disposal Facility Programme is going to be taken out of the equation. I'll tell you what, fuck it, I'll do it when it's, I've got a slide that's, you need to look at it properly. So let's just move forward for the minute. So let's just go back to the overview of what the department is supposedly looking like. Now they've got the 14.66 million. Again, that doesn't fall in line with, as you see up the top there, and that you've got 14.1 billion. Is it a matter of where the decimal place is put? I don't really give a shit, because at the end of the day, I know the numbers are not going to add up anyway. So I'll make those adjustments once I get to the end of it. So you can see the way that they seem to have it, things all divided out according to their most recent report. Again, it's not going to be correct. I mean, I think I did this previously as well, and that with the Cabinet Office, where they lay it out in this fashion to try to, you know, the pretty picture, the one picture that gives an overview of this, that and the other. It's always wrong. But I want to give an indication as to how they're reporting things. Okay, so you can do your pause and have a look and make your own notes, whatever you want. And again, all of these things and that links are in the description. Right, so now we start to move into the areas where you can actually see what it is that I'm talking about. So the top graphic you got there, and that's a snippet from the information that I presented last week, which does come from the Infrastructure Projects Authority. Why are these things so hard to say? Beer could have something to do with it. So if you remember, 2 of the projects have been completed already, so they're not included. From the graphic that they've presented, 5 of these projects, as I said, there's crossover. So what I've done is taken a look at the figures that I had from the Projects Authority report, and then I've looked at the figures that they've been presenting, and I've also taken it one step further, because the more up-to-date figures come from the National Audit Office, and where we've got disparity here is from the Geological Disposal Facility Programme, where they report the figure as being less than from the Infrastructure Projects Authority by 398,997,000. You've got the I've got a funny feeling I'm moving on to the next page again. I think I am. I'm moving on. I'm getting worse at this. Every time I've got notes, it seems to make matters worse for me. Let's have a look. I might need to do a little bit of backwards and forwards here, but let's have a look. Right, I'm going to go back again. Bollocks to it. So anyway, yeah, they've reported these figures as being less. Then you've got the Heat Networks investment project that's reported less by 3.9 million. You've got the local land charges programme reported less by 300,000. The new Polar Research ridiculously expensive vessel, that one they've actually managed to get correct across the board. No doubt they've obviously thought, well, we've already taken the piss too much as it is, so yeah. The smart metering one is absolutely phenomenally different. Oh, and you can see from the number that's by the side with the National Audit Office, they've got that as 17 billion. Well, that's then less by 184 billion, 153,509,301. I mean, this is quite a significant problem. So, as much as there's 3 of the projects that I suppose within the realms of being minorly correct, it's not good enough. If you've got these departments and that are reporting numbers, the numbers should bloody well match. It shouldn't be rocket science. So you have to question the competency around this, and if the figures have suddenly gone up for some reason, because the timeline of the reporting is the same, but then you could be looking towards cost creep. You could be looking at all manner of different problems. But I mean, I can only assume with the smart meter one that's where I'd broken it down on the annual value of 13 billion. Have they broken it down as an annual value in that one? So coming up with this 17 billion. I mean, it doesn't make a great deal of sense, because if that was the case, then why are the others on a total project value? So it's just wrong. There's no commonality of method there. So I want to point out some of the variations that are going to end up causing a bit of an issue when it comes down to putting the final calculation together, so that we can actually check to see if it meets up with the budgets. So that gives that little bit of an explanation. Hopefully, if that wasn't too confusing because of me going backwards and forwards, but anyway. So what I've done then, I want to avoid this double counting, and I can only take out the numbers that make sense. Okay. Let me just go back one more second. Oh no, it's okay. It's alright, there was a sudden glow appeared in my head there, but never mind. So what I can do is start to check the numbers as best as possible and start removing the annualised programs where it can be possibly done, and then come up with what I believe the department as a whole is going to have to equate to at the end, to see if we're looking at matched numbers, which, like I say, I don't hold any hope out for at all. But as much as they do clearly make the mistake of double accounting and messing things up and doing things incompetently, I want to try to get things as best I possibly can. Right, so the other part that is going to be relevant for me to take into consideration is the fact that, because the one at the bottom there, it says BEIS core, they're saying that the central governance of that department comes out at 3.1 billion, which then would mean that the remaining offices come out to the 10 billion blah 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 blah. So that's also a number that needs to be taken into consideration. I think I've really explained this one badly, but you know, when you've got this tends to be one of the problems when you've got these systems set out in such a way that it's so appallingly laid out, where there's just no accountability and transparency, and no, all of the things that we were told that they're supposed to be, you know, the core values of government, just doesn't exist. I mean, so trying to put all this together to make it look like it's some sort of sense, it will in the end when I get to the end of the process, but I've just got to be able to put things in some sort of fashion to identify what it is that we're dealing with before it then comes out in the whole model as one clear, concise picture, which is so desperately needed. There is another piece of information that's going to be important here, and that if you do decide to download the annual reports, is that the numbers that I'm looking at here are not based on the consolidated accounts. So I'm looking at annual budgets, annual revenue spend. I'm not looking towards the consolidated accounts, because if I do that, then that's something, well, it's something I'm going to have to look at a later stage. But if I was to do that now, I think we'd also see this department, it would cover the budget for the whole of government for, it works out to something like 3 years. So in terms of that kind of thing, and that what we're going to have to be looking towards at the end, as I have mentioned on a previous occasion, where you end up with all these black holes, a lot of it will probably be found within the consolidated accounts. So essentially in that, I think what you've got here in that is there's potentially various assets that they're throwing into the mix. Various outstanding payments from historical projects. There's a whole range of different nonsense in the way that they report these things, but in order for us to have some sort of level of clarity and being able to move forward correctly, I want to do it year by year, the closest year that I can get reported accounts for, and so we can compare it to the budget. Because like I say, if I put the consolidated in there, your annual budget is up the swanny straight away. So I think you can get some idea as to what we're going to be dealing with this department straight away, and especially when you consider that the people within this are supposed to be the ones that seem to think that they're best placed to come up with the policies and how the country is going to be going forward, conducting business, and what our energy infrastructure is going to look like, and the industrial strategy side of things. And that is basically, that's an awful lot of that is just following all this World Economic Forum bullshit. You know, the fanciful crap that we had coming out of Boris Johnson this week about the country is going to be entirely, have the energy sector entirely run by fairy farts by 2050 or some such. I mean, it's just utter garbage. I mean, I don't know how many people that work in that particular sector and understand energy capacity. How many people have turned around and said time and time and time and time and again, it doesn't work. You are not going to be able to replace the energy system with fairy farts and sunbeams coming out of Greta's arse. It's not going to work. But because they're so adamant that they just have to parrot the nonsense coming out of this United Nations and World Economic Forum, I mean, they're literally just completely lost. They will just say whatever's been put in front of them, and then just literally destroy the country. And when you're destroying the country in that way, and you're looking towards government basically dictating what business is allowed to take place and what business isn't, and they will shut down everybody else, that's destroying democracy. And the diligence part of it, I think I've just demonstrated that there is no diligence, there's no competency within these people. So for these ones to be demanding that the nation follows their Green New Deal and all the rest of it, I mean, if your pipe dream was to go back to living in a cave, yeah, great. Doesn't work out historically very well, that sort of ideology. If you think COVID, the bullshit they come out with, how many people have been killed through COVID, despite the fact that they just shove pensioners into their care home rooms and starve them to death, you know, apparently that's COVID. If you want to see death on a massive scale, you go through this, you let them do this, and you will see death on a massive scale. It's just an appalling state of affairs. So let's move through into policies. Right, obviously in that I've still got the cumulative savings that have already been identified. Not really going to go forward with too much on that one, but the one change I've got at the bottom there is the risk assessment of the entire department. That's going to form part of the overview, obviously, and that within the RASIC there will be the different departments that are underneath that, and or offices underneath that. And there's seriously got to be the review as to the risks to the nation that these people are just prepared to bound forward with, and just literally have no care for anyone at all. If there was some people within government that actually understood business to some degree, you'd kind of think, well, is there something specific that they can demonstrate and give evidence of, and actually speak to the nation to say, well, okay, this is the process of how we're looking to do things, and this is how it will actually work in reality, and then let those of us that actually do know what we're doing run through it. That would be one thing. I mean, we'd be able to tear it to pieces in an instant, but it would be something. But what you do get from these people is just the most ridiculous reports, where it's literally, you'll have one particular individual say, well, this is my particular area and I'm going to suggest this, that in and of itself makes no sense. Now, the fact of the matter is that it does have relevance to another sector and another sector and another sector. There's no joining up of that. There's no overall perspective. There's no understanding of the risks between the two different strategies. It's just sheer bloody minded, single view lunacy, and God almighty. Anyway, there's a little bit of a relevance here, because I don't need to this week show what the department looks like at this stage, because it's too early. So, like I say, I mean, look into these things for yourself, because if you don't understand my mixed way of explaining this and that, because like I say, it does my bloody head in, try to look at it yourself and that, and to get an idea as well, because the amount of stuff that I'm guaranteed to be missing here, this is kind of why I want the input from people to say, well, okay, I've looked at the reports as well, and this is what I'm finding to be a problem. And, you know, yes, I could include it then in the RASIC, so that we can get some understanding as to what it is that we're supposed to be digging into deeper later on, what the policy will be and what the process will be for taking things forward, so we can actually have some competence. I don't know. Let's move forward anyway.
Fuck off! Who you think you are, you cheeky fucking twat!
Right. Bringing back FOWEFUN, obviously. So let's go into the United Nations. This week, it won't be of any surprise to anybody that we've got yet another communist. So you've got the International Civil Aviation Organization. So this does actually have relevance to all of the guff around this, Build Back Better, and what business is supposed to be in the future, and all this sort of stuff and that. And because, especially when it comes down to working between nations, things like aviation become incredibly important. Why have you got a communist sat at the head of the table, and that somehow we're supposed to be, because I mean the UK does pay into this, and again, trying to find out how much we pay into it, very little transparency there. And this does actually tie into this report that I've got at the top there, and that about the US withholding their dues So this comes from October of last year. The US have actually been an awful lot better than practically every other nation in either withdrawing or withholding monies from these people and showing up to be the absolute scumbags that they are. The particular reason why they withheld the money was because they'd had a cyber attack in 2016. So when this little commie was in charge, and the only way people found out about it, and that was through a whistleblower. There was no transparency around it at all. So where do you think that cyber attack came from? Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out, I wouldn't imagine. So because of the lack of, the US government specifically said, we expect a transparent and trustworthy governance, and we expect accountability and for performance and conduct. You're not going to get it from these people, and you don't get it from the British bloody government for a start off, and you don't get it from any of these organisations, but especially when you got it run by a bloody communist. But then the one problem with the article, which is in the links as usual, it's from Reuters, and they can't help but try to have some sort of irrelevant pop at Donald Trump by going on about the absolute lunacy about the links between Trump and Ukraine, which is actually Biden, not Trump. So, they have to try to deflect in some way or another, try to bring out something that's the straw man argument. I think that's the right term, straw man. Probably wrong, but anyway. But the other thing around this particular individual, if you look at the bottom, the criticism of her, above that the entrance from Wikipedia, and that is about her background and how she is involved with the Communist Party, basically, because you don't get to have those positions in China without being a member of the Communist Party. I've said it before, I'll say it again. But then within this COVID bullshit, denying Taiwan access to participation in crisis coordination efforts, and then silencing criticism on Twitter. I know that people might be familiar with a fellow from the World Health Organization that shut off an interview when Taiwan was mentioned. But how many of you know that under little commie there, they'd been interfering with the aviation side of things as well? So, this is not an organisation that we should be part of. It just shouldn't. It's when you look at everything in the round in terms of this agenda that's being pushed through, this great reset and like I say the bullshit terminology, the Build Back Better. It's all within the same. It's all within the same structure, and it's all based on bullshit. And none of it is for anybody's benefit. We should not be having our airspace, our regulations dictated to by a bloody commie. Simple as that. We just shouldn't. So, move into the World Economic Forum. This one I've picked on because it fits within the narrative that you get of all of this great reset, and we're all supposed to be the fairy farts and sunbeams out of Greta's arse and all this sort of stuff, and everything that we're going to be building, and that is going to be all wonderful for the planet, and everything that gets built is going to be built out of daffodils. Well, one of the members of the World Economic Forum that is in support, obviously, of all of this crap, there's a web page dedicated to them that shows all of the areas of criminality and all of the areas of how they are destroying the environment. Whether a lot of this is true or not, I'm sure a bit of a deeper dive looking into it, and that would probably suggest that, yeah, they are doing a fair bit wrong. So how exactly does it make sense that we're supposed to be taking instruction from organisations that are telling us that their Great Reset is going to be wonderful for the environment and wonderful for everything, despite making no sense whatsoever and all being based on a lie. This is supposed to be dictated to us by people that they're useful idiots, you know, the sort of on the ground socialists, the excrement rebellion terrorists and all those sorts of people. They're producing these kind of criticisms, and yet they're working hand in hand with them. How does that make sense? When you've got when you've got a company that has got, I mean, I've got several of them, companies that are working hand in hand with each other, doing the as per usual with idiot socialists, where they will spew out the most ridiculous rhetoric, and then they will back that up by saying, oh, it's you know, it's all going to be for the betterment, and yet everything that they say has the direct opposite of what they've just spoken. I mean, they could literally walk up to you and say, I have absolutely no intention of stabbing you, whilst grabbing your neck and ramming the biggest knife that they can get into your stomach. But they have no intention of doing that. They happen to have done it, but they didn't intend to. That's essentially the type of lunacy that you're dealing with these people. So why would a company like this Adani be involved with the World Economic Forum and being responsible for all of these different well, I mean, there's, you know, I'm not so sure about the tax haven thing and that, but I bet I could look into that and it wouldn't be quite what was being presented, but whatever. Bribery scandals, destroying the environment. And like I say, link in the description, you can go through all of it and see all the different accusations that are made about them and how they bribe the police, local politicians, custom officials, state pollution control boards, the port departments, weights and measurement department, blah blah blah. Why would that be a member of the organisation that is telling us that they have the best intentions? There's no logic to it. There never is with socialists. And if you wonder what's the difference between the socialist agenda and these kinds of organisations that, I mean, this is kind of like the idiocy where they try to confuse you of saying, well, you've got those that are saying, well, we want everything to be essentially government owned, so that's where they fall out of socialism and straight into communism. And they're anti the private sector, which they think is represented by these organisations. Well, they are working hand in hand with the governments in terms of the government saying, right, we're going to hand all the contracts over to our mates in this agenda, and you literally will be controlling those assets together with us, because all contracts, everything will be handed over to you. If you run into any problems at all, we're going to be backing you up with the taxpayer money. So it's in their benefit to just turn around and continue doing whatever the hell they're doing. They're in the club. I think Scotty called it corporatism. I don't know if I would go quite along with that term, but it doesn't really matter. It's as good as any. It is large private organisations working hand in hand with government, and essentially it's as close as you can possibly get to being government asset without being government asset, because then it's working together hand in hand with those few individuals that own an awful lot of this crap in the first place, so that the government is the one that will handle the diktats and the authoritarianism, and then the select few companies in the World Economic Forum, they will control a lot of the assets and production and so forth, where instances like this current scenario where they're just locking down everything and that to try to destroy all the competition, it won't affect these organisations because taxpayer money will be fed through to them to make sure. It'll be fairly similar to like the banking crisis type of thing, where it'll be a case of, well, oh, too big to fail, oh, we need these companies, and they will just hand over our money to support them, guaranteed. So, like I say, it shows the idiocy of the system that is being put together. It shows the hypocrisy of the system that is being put together. And it shows that when you've got all these morons that think that being in support of this sort of nonsense is going to be of benefit in the future, it isn't. It literally isn't. These people are literally going to destroy as much as they possibly can. Right, so I've got a sign-off page here, and I've changed the sign-off page because I will be going into the Moirai directory as normal. I'll get another page over here now. And I figured, well, fuck it, you know, I'm sure, I mean, I have had a couple of questions and that from people as to what it is that I actually do aside from this. This is some of the stuff that I do within ICPR 1200. So, yeah, I do some the international representation. The main one that I'm doing at the moment, so that's within the steel wire rope and alloy plated wire rope. Non-executive director appointments, obviously that's one that that one gets to be quite amusing sometimes, because if any organisation, and that's, I mean, essentially, if you don't know what a non-executive director is, it's somebody that's you don't have ownership, any levels of ownership within the company. You go in as kind of like an advisor, and it's a cheap way of being able to get experienced, knowledgeable management in place, where you turn up maybe like once a month or something like that, and you help advise the company to go forward. Coming across organisations that have started to go with all of this woke shit, those are quite amusing, because you sort of you sit in the meetings and they start talking, and me being me, I mean, I don't change my personality particularly. If I see that they're talking complete and utter bollocks, I will interrupt and say, right, the problem that you've got at the moment is you're talking bollocks. If you're spending your time and money and wasting it on postmodernist socialist crap, that's where your problem is. So if you get rid of that, you might end up having a proper company. So I don't work with people that have got absolutely no brains whatsoever. So anyway, that's what a non-exec does. Turn up maybe once a month. So you're looking at anywhere, but it's cost saving effectively, because generally speaking, that, I mean, if you want to have experienced managers in your organisation, you're looking anywhere, I don't know, 100 grand plus a year, which most of the smaller companies in particular and that can't afford that. So if you just turn up on the one day of the year, you get information that gets fed through to you and that, and you can bring that down to something like around about anywhere between 15-20 grand. So cost effective way of doing things. Then obviously in that, because of the way that I've been structuring things, I'm hoping, and obviously in that I did show you an example in episode 1, I do a lot of the process management as well. So I'll be putting this sort of stuff up, and that to give myself a little bit of a boost. Why not? I've been putting the Moirai directory up and that, and giving everybody else a boost. So there is one addition to the Moirai directory this week, and it's a book. It's not a company as such, and it's been written by, if I can get this pronunciation right, I can get the first part right, Pauline, hang on, Chekmajian, possibly, sorry about that, Pauline, if I've got that wrong. Right, she's got a book called The Sphinxing Rabbit, and it is it's an amusing book, covers a lot of the types of subjects that most people will understand, or get a bit of an understanding around this, like the likes of the Great Reset and all this sort of stuff. And it's done in a light-hearted a light-hearted way, in an amusing way. So I have got a link in the description as well, and that for the being able to buy it at Amazon. So the description that they have there is, what would you do if you were truly free? Deceptively simple in appearance, yet heavy in content, the Sphinx in Rabbit series of books, starting with Her Sovereign Majesty, aims to communicate tenets of freedom in an entertaining manner as opposed to complex intellectual discourse, which has already been attempted many times in history, but to little avail. Moreover, each book alludes to a few famous works of art. It's a book worth getting. And if anybody's on LinkedIn, I'm sure you can come across Pauline as well there. Some of the posts that she puts up and that are very good. So I thought I'd give a bit of a shout out to her as well. Whether there's anybody out there that's got anything relevant for ICPR 1200, I mean, if you have, great. If not, I don't care. I mean, the one thing about my company is that as much as anybody that tries to have a look and see exactly what it is that I do, you're not really going to get it, because it's not just my company here, and that there's oh Christ, was it 50 of them around the world. So that's how I end up having like the international representation and etc. etc. So helping companies get into new markets and all this type of stuff. But anyway, I thought I'd give myself a little bit of an assistance. Not that it matters, but anyway. So, I mean, if you wanted to have a look in more details on that, there's the web page there. So just search it and find out for yourself. Right, so that's going to bring this particular episode to an end, I believe. Feedback welcome. Don't forget to have a look at Scotty's website, and if there's anybody that needs photography work or anything like that doing, drop him a line. Hopefully I'll be able to do more than just, obviously, not just an overview of the one department. Next week I want to be able to dig into those 49 offices underneath BEIS. I think I'm probably going to have to try my best to get at least, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 of them done each episode. How possible that's going to be, we'll have to see, because, like I said, these are very, very important subject matters when it comes down to business, because it means what your economy is going to look like. Are we going to go forward with this destroy democracy and diligence, or are we going to actually have people wake up and say, right, we actually need competence, we need people that know what they're doing, we need businesses that understand what they're doing, we need something that is going to be of benefit to the population as a whole, and what kind of businesses can not just benefit the nation that you're within and provide the jobs and that, of course, and that everybody needs, because the one part that they really do miss out on, and that is the fact that the vast majority of employees across any nation are made up out of the small and medium enterprises. It's not the big companies. They do not rule the roost in the way that they think they do. So this sort of stuff and that needs to be taken into consideration. And you can't feed everything through into larger organisations. You just can't do that, because it just doesn't work, and you will start to lose the innovation as well. People, the incentive to do it will just be completely destroyed. So there's a range of different ways as to how things can be disincentivized, and the way they're going about it at the moment is one of them. So we really need to be paying attention to this particular department, because the interference to business, the interference to the economy is absolutely critical. So pay attention, okay, and have a look at your own nation as well. Like I say, any sorts of comments that you want to, if, like I say, some of the gibberish that I've come out with earlier on, where I was sort of going backwards and forwards, if there's something that you didn't understand, just ask a question. I'll try to make sense a little bit better in a response. Okay, so all the best. And it was 13, unlucky for some, so who knows. I'll take things forward anyway, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Okay, cheers, bye.